Congratulations making it to this point. Now that you've made it through all of that introductory material, you are qualified to have your sewing license. Today, you will sew, for real, the actual thing. Don't you feel like a race car driver? But before you zoom off into a bunch of projects, we're gonna have to learn some of the basics. But don't worry, once you learn the basics, it's just like riding a bicycle or driving a car. You'll use this information for the rest of your sewing life. These are the fundamentals, the important parts of sewing. Now remember those pieces you cut out in the last video? You're gonna need to go grab those because we're gonna use them in this video to practice sewing. The first piece you'll need is your strip of white fabric. Now the other fabrics, I don't care what color they are, but this one needs to be solid white, just simply because you need to be able to see your stitches. Also, make sure that you have a dark colored thread, hot pink, red, black, all of them work. Just make sure that you can see it on here. So let's go.
Assuming your machine is already threaded, you just need to turn it on. When I previously demonstrated bringing the bobbin thread up, I mentioned it was not necessary to pull the thread tails all the way out because when I tried this machine and used the bobbin thread cutter, I found that the bobbin thread was really tiny and difficult to pull. I then tested it several times and did not have an issue as long as the bobbin thread was raised. That said, it is preferable to pull the thread tails all the way out to prevent any issue with the bobbin thread, and you'll need to make sure you move your thread tails to the back of the machine so they don't get tangled in your stitches. Now that your bobbin thread is up and your machine is threaded, let's take a look at the procedure for preparing to sew. Pay attention, this will become like second nature. This is the way. Memorize it, love it, live it. Ready for it? You do not need to take a screenshot of this. You will be seeing it 13 or maybe 20 more times in this video. First, you need to lift your presser foot. Next, slide your two pieces of white fabric under the presser foot with the small side to the right of the presser foot. The largest side will be on the left. Align the fabric with the seam width line on the right of the foot. In this case, I'm aligning it with the 1/2 inch seam allowance line. When you use the hand wheel to lower the needle into the fabric, it's called burying the needle. When you bury your needle, it should be in the location you want your first stitch to be. The buried needle keeps the fabric in place, but lowering the presser foot once the needle is buried will engage the feed dogs, allowing you to sew. Once you've mastered these 4 steps, the fabric is aligned at the right of the presser foot, the needle is buried, and the presser foot is down, you can carefully push down on the foot pedal and sew. But before we do that, let's review one more time the procedure for preparing to sew. With your needle buried and your presser foot down, you're ready to sew. Push down on the foot pedal, and just like that, you're sewing. Go slow in the beginning, watching carefully as you go, using the guideline on the right to keep your fabric and stitches straight. If you continue to guide the fabric carefully to align with that guideline, it'll help you to sew straight. Once you've sewed near the end of the strip of fabric, practice stitching in reverse. Pull the lever on the right of the machine down to sew in reverse. Typically, to seal off a seam and keep it from coming loose, we stitch a few stitches in reverse over the line we just sewed. We typically do this at the start and end of each seam. While you're sewing, do not pull on, tug, or push the fabric. That job belongs to the feed dogs. Use your hands to guide the fabric only, and be very careful to keep your fingers clear of the needle. Have I ever sewed through my finger? Yes, I have. And I do not recommend it. Use your hands to guide, but not to force the fabric. Your feed dogs are strong, and they are not hurt by needles. When you stop in the middle of your sewing, there's something very important to remember. If the needle's not buried already, crank the hand wheel always towards yourself until it is buried. This is a very important step. If you stop in the middle of a seam, always make sure your needle is buried so your fabric will not slide and ruin your stitching line. Sew all the way to the end of your strip of white fabric, reverse stitch, and then release the fabric. When you want to release the fabric from the machine, do not pull the fabric with the needle still buried in it. That will only break your needle. Instead, crank the hand wheel always towards yourself until the hook inside the needle channel reaches its highest point. Then lift the presser foot and pull the fabric out, clipping the thread tails. Or if you don't want to use scissors, there's actually a little blade on the side of your machine. Now that you've finished your first line on the white strip of fabric, let's repeat the process and practice it many times on that strip. As you begin a new line, you'll need to move the fabric over to a further line on your guide. I've moved mine over to the 3/4 line. When you get to the end, clip your threads and get ready to start the whole process all over again. Another way to sew straight is to use the edge of your presser foot as a guide. Put the last seam you sewed right next to the edge of your presser foot and sew with that line continually next to the presser foot. As long as that line was straight, the other one will be too. Remember as you're sewing not to pull or tug or push the fabric, just guide it gently with your hands and keep your hands clear of the needle. In that video, I was showing you how to use the left side of your presser foot as a guide, and I did that because by that point I'd sewn a lot of lines on the strip and I wanted the bulk of my fabric to be on the left side, which is what you typically want, is most of the fabric to the left and not to the right. But now I'm going to show you what it looks like to be sewing and using the right side of your presser foot as a guide. So that's what I'm doing here. Continue the process, adding more and more lines, and as you add more lines, you'll need to flip it to the other side so that the bulk will always be on the left. When you're done, your white strip of fabric will be full of all your hard work. But if it looks more like this one, don't worry. I would expect that most people's stitch lines would look more like this. It's totally normal. Sewing straight takes a lot of practice, which is why you have the whole strip for working on. Cut more fabric and practice until you feel comfortable sewing straight. Be patient with yourself and you will get it.
Now you need your piece with all the corners. It doesn't have to look exactly like this. You just want something that has a lot of corners to practice on. It doesn't have to be, but I like these pieces to be from solid color fabric because I don't want to deal with the print yet. So if you can grab a solid color fabric with a dark thread, it'll enable you to look at your work after you're done. And we're gonna start in the top right corner with the piece extending away from the machine.
Remember this? Same procedure. It is the way. Live it, love it. Except now, when you get to within about a 1/2 inch of the end, you're going to stop with the needle buried in the fabric. It's very important. It needs to be buried in the fabric. And then you're going to learn procedure number 2. Okay, you ready for it? Here it is! You've arrived! The procedure for turning a corner. With the needle buried, lift the presser foot, which releases the feed dogs, and then turn the fabric in the new direction you want to go. So let's try that trick again. When you're headed in the direction you want to go, drop the presser foot, which will engage the feed dogs, and you're ready to sew. Go until you're a 1/2 inch from the next end and repeat the process. Your needle buried, lift the presser foot, rotate the fabric, drop the presser foot. I'm not teaching you yet how to use fabric pins to keep the fabric pieces from slipping. It is highly likely that they will want to shift as you are sewing. Don't worry too much if this happens. It is very normal, and it is more important at this stage that you learn how to bury the needle, lift the presser foot, and rotate the fabric than it is to keep the fabric from slipping. This is what you need to know. For the perfectionists out there, if this happens to you, simply stop, slide the fabric back into position, and continue to guide it until it straightens itself out. Fabric is very malleable. Actually, this is a really advanced and kind of hard project that I gave you for practicing. So if it's frustrating, well, it's actually kind of advanced. But just do your best, because the important thing that you're learning here is how to make sure that your needle is buried, lift the presser foot, rotate the fabric, and then put the presser foot down. And if you get that, it's the most important thing you're learning from this lesson. Even I struggled a bit, as you will see. I wasn't paying attention and I sewed way too far up. No worries. This is just for practice, for you, for learning and experimentation. Oh, I'm embarrassed of that. I wasn't watching. But here's the rule. If you don't like your stitches, there is no crying allowed. Instead, you're to congratulate yourself and eat candy. Frame your beautiful stitches that you just sewed, because with those stitches, instead of being just a YouTube wannabe, you've crossed the threshold and entered a bright new future. You are on your way. Think of those stitches as art. Remember the rule, if yours looks less like this and more like this, no crying, more candy.
The next race car car driving skill you're gonna learn is how to go around a curve. Find your pieces that have curves.
For these curved pieces, start in the middle of one side. Slide the fabric underneath the machine, somewhere near the middle of the strip. Sew, and when you get to the curve, slow down. Use your hand to gently guide the fabric around, and do your best to keep it the same distance from the edge, but that is very hard to do. In the future, when you have a very important seam on a curve, you can draw the stitching line onto the fabric with a pencil or tailor's pen and just stitch on top of that line. For now, it's more important to get the feel of controlling the fabric on a curve. We are only practicing. You are fabulous. You are a superstar of sewing, and you're just as good as the little old ladies who do this every day. When you get to the middle on the other side of the strip after going around the curve, stop and turn the corner. Stitch about 1/4 inch and then turn the corner again until your presser foot aligns with the stitching line you just sewed. Now come back the other way and continue the process, creating a little rainbow. You can even sing to yourself as you work. Somewhere over the rainbow works, even though you may equate this particular sewing experiment to the flying monkeys part. You know, it sounds like such an innocent song until you remember the flying monkeys. That's just to say that sewing around a curve is really tricky. It's always very difficult, and I would not expect your project to look anything like this one, though I'm not doubting that there may be a sewing prodigy out there that I'm completely unaware of, but really you should just not worry about it. The most important thing is that you're getting used to the way that fabric feels when you're moving it around a curve. The further in you sew, the more difficult it's going to be because the curve will be smaller and smaller. And the smaller the curve, the tighter the turn. It's just like race car driving. The tighter the turn, the more dangerous, the more exciting, the more difficult it is to achieve. I actually had some trouble with this one. It's definitely something I'm going to need to practice, but I would expect yours to look a little bit more like this one. And if it does, you're right on track. This is what I wanted. I just want you to get comfortable with sewing around curves.
This last sewing trick I'm going to show you today has to do with creating a seam. A seam is created anytime two pieces of fabric are joined together with a stitch. Unless you're doing it creatively for some fringy kind of reason, almost never are you going to see a pair of pants with this on the outside. That would be weird looking unless you did some creative little thing with it. But that's not what we're doing, and that's not what you want to do. You don't want your bags to have that on the outside. So how do we keep that from happening? One way. All fabrics have a right side and a wrong side. The right side is the side that you want to be showing when you're finished. The wrong side is the part that you want towards the inside. That's the part you're hiding. When you're creating a seam, you're using two pieces of fabric. Now, if you sew with both of these together, you're gonna have that funky little thing on the outside, which is not what you want. Unless you want to have that funky thing on the outside, or you want this to be showing. The way to keep that seam on the inside is to put right sides together. So we take the right side of the fabric on both of these pieces and we put those two together. So it looks like that. You're gonna hear right sides together so often, it might as well be your mantra. You might as well say it every night before you go to bed. Right sides together. So now that we've got your right sides together, let's go ahead and take this piece and go all the way down and create a seam.
After what I just put you through, this seam is going to be so easy. You are going to have no problem whatsoever. But that's part of why I wanted you to practice all those other things, because I want you to know that this is something you can do. And actually, about 95% of what you will do is exactly this. Just this simple. If you can do this, you can sew a satin pillowcase, which is going to be our first project in the next video.
Now that you've sewn it all the way down from one end to the other, you're gonna take both sides and open them up. And on the right side, you just made a seam. And this is what it looks like on the wrong side. The thing that we want to do when we're done with the seam is either finish this raw edge with a zigzag stitch or a serger, or the other thing that we'll do to start with is to press these seams open all the way down. So we'll take an iron and we're going to press this seam. Ah, look, how sweet. It's so cute. It's your first seam. That last part I taught you about pressing your seams open is so important. I can't overstate it. People get lazy and so they stop doing this part, but I can always tell a garment that doesn't have its seams pressed open. You would go to the store and if you found a garment that did not have its seams pressed open, you would say, that doesn't fit very well, or there's something weird about that. And now you're gonna know what it is. If the project is worth your time, it's worth your time to sew it right. And that's why it's so important for you to be practicing all of the things that I taught you today. In fact, I would say that the things that I taught you in this video are probably more important than any other I'm going to show you from here on out. Because everything that you learned in this video, you'll be using every single time you sit down to the machine. And your ability to execute those things well will determine the success of your project. So practice up, and I'll see you next video when you'll hear me say, sew-ists, start your engines.
But do watch where you're going, follow safe sewing practices, and don't get a ticket.